So yours. Is that me then?
Live. I think it's Chris Sauber.
Oh, that sounds better now.
We are live, guys. Uh, Chris, your mic doesn't sound that great, but
How
it's
about now?
okay. No,
No.
it's
Okay.
worse. But we'll let people get on. There is a new executive order. There's never a dull moment with this new presidency, by the way. And Darshan's on vacation. Normally, this would be like, Darshan, get on, scare us about this, you know. And from what I've analyzed so far this morning, because this executive order came out today from Trump, so most favored nation pricing executive order. Most experts, and I'm not really, I don't consider one myself on this matter in particular, are saying this is so far a nothing burger. It's theatrics, but because it requires congressional approval, which
Mhm.
failed last time Trump tried to do this.
Mhm.
However, there's potential ramifications for our industries, particularly in the United States. Uh, and so we're going to explore the latest trends and policies with myself, Darshan, Chris. So just today, all right, President Trump signed the executive order on most favored nation pricing. And this executive order aims to lower drug prices in the US, but it could have big ripple effects for companies like yours and mine, Chris, for anyone's site really. And we're going to try to break down predictions, what we think, how we think this might impact research. So the first thing maybe, and you've talked about this most favored nation pricing in the past, but it's essentially the big idea is to make drug prices in the US the same as the lowest prices in other developed countries. So like Canada or Germany.
I think
Right now, we pay way more for drugs, something like 75% of the subsidy of R&D is basically due to U.S. drug pricing. More or less correct, no?
so. You and I have done videos on this many years ago, like 10 years ago,
I
where,
remember, yeah,
where
I know.
where we discussed that the United States, if it were not for the United States, there would be no real R&D left. The United States
Correct.
pays for like 80% of the cost of R&D by
It's
what they
75. It's since then
okay.
it's gone down 5%,
Okay, so 75% of drug costs are covered
subsidized by the U.S. Yeah,
by the US for the entire world. Like for
correct.
example, France, they I don't remember what it was, so don't quote me on this, but back when we did a video on this probably 10 years ago, at the time, the United States, for a 30-day prescription of this one drug, it was like $250. And for France, it was $8. So that just gives you an idea of how the United States covers the cost of R&D. So
Right.
would that directly affect R&D if the United States were to say pay the same as France for these drugs?
So
I think
here's
I think it would.
here's where it gets interesting. So, because I've read this morning, I've been reading, and people on X, there's somebody I follow there called John Carroll. He's like an industry insider, basically a big pharma apologist, more or less. He gets
Mm-hmm.
paid by writing about big pharma in a good light, more or less, because that's who he writes about is who sponsors his
Yeah.
articles, right? So, I mean,
So whoever he writes favorably about gives him
yeah,
money.
there's not a real conflict there, right? But that's who we have, and you know what? Credit to him. He's at least transparent about it, and he has good points. So, um, to this morning on X, he said, big pharma stocks are green today as the actual language of the executive order on most favored nation is circulated. Looks like a big nothing to me. More sound and fury, but no real action yet. But what does that mean? That means pharma stocks went up, but Carroll's talking about his take is it doesn't have immediate steps to enforce lower prices, but this could potentially impact because if we go deeper, if we click deeper onto where this hits home for us, side owners, people that work in the United States in this industry, if drug prices in the US drop by 30 to 80%, like some of the reports suggest, the executive order said US funds 75% of global pharma profits. So that's where I was telling you 75. Less money means they might cut back on R&D, which means fewer drugs to test. Now, it could also mean increasing prices in Europe, but that might mean encouraging the drug companies to do more studies overseas as opposed to here. Trump did say that we can start importing cheaper drugs from other countries if the drug companies don't comply with the executive order. One of the things that I saw was this could potentially, because their only real lever is Medicare pricing, right? So who's in charge of that is the PBM, pharmacy benefit managers. And the pharmacy benefit managers are the ones that are negotiating the price, but like in secrecy, more or less. So there's like zero transparency. Trump did say in the executive order that he would encourage direct to consumer pricing, which would eliminate the middleman. In this case, is pharmacy benefit manager. And if you're doing that in Europe, so like Novo Nordisk would sell, they're a European company, would sell Ozempic direct to consumer here in the United States. They were already working on doing these things anyways, because with Trump coming in, they knew this was eventually going to be an issue that they would have. But that's one of the ways we can kind of go around the PBMs is by going direct to consumer, which the technology is there. Like every retailer is doing direct to consumer anyways. Nike's selling shoes
So,
directly to consumers instead of going through Foot Locker. You still have the retail, you still have
but
the
define
pharmacies.
define direct to consumer in terms of a
So
prescription.
like a Hims or Hers, you do a telehealth, or you get your prescription from your doctor, whether it's telehealth or in person, and then you send that prescription to, let's say it's Lilly. Let's say your doctor wrote a prescription for Wegovy. So
Mhm.
you go to Lilly's portal, upload your prescription, and then they send it to you directly, as opposed to going to your pharmacy and getting it filled.
So of course
That's a direct to consumer.
sure. So there is an arbitrage. Well, it's not even an arbitrage, but there is a markup between the pharmaceutical company and the pharmacy, because the pharmacy has to make profit. So what you're saying is you're going to eliminate the pharmacy and cut down on the profit.
Yeah, because it's not the pharmacy necessarily; it's the pharmacy using pharmacy benefit managers to negotiate their prices with
Sure,
insurance
but that's so
companies.
there's a profit there for the pharmacy.
For the pharmacy benefit manager, really, they're taking the majority of the profit, the arbitrage. The pharmacy is getting a profit, but it's really the PBMs that are getting the bulk of that delta. And that's really who, indirectly, this is a way around it. It's going direct to consumer. But as far as the research being done overseas, so Trump said if the now this still has to go through Congress. This is looking like at earliest it's going to be like 2026. Like they can do the vote as early as the fall of this year, but it really wouldn't be implemented till next year. And next year being an election cycle for the midterms, the argument is they're going to be using this as one of the chips to swing votes one way or another.
Sure, we'll lower your drug costs because every American is on something.
Right.
We'll lower
And
that cost if you vote for us.
right. So drug companies might move trials to other countries. I'm going worst case scenario. Charlie Munger said the inversion model. How could this go wrong? What's the worst thing that can happen? The uncertainty might delay trials in the US. We're already seeing CROs struggling. I think Fortrea came out with earnings and they're off to a horrible start. They burned through all their cash. So you might see delayed projects. You might see canceled projects until some clarity is in the market. You might see cheaper imported drugs that will reduce demand for new drugs. And you might see drug companies move their trials to other countries. So the executive order says that the U.S. might try to stop other countries from paying super low prices. If other countries end up paying more, drug companies might just run more studies in those countries at that point to get the consumers there, right? So it might reduce the need for the sites in the U.S. Worst case scenario. Not sure what you think about that. The Alliance of Aging Research blog, which I looked at this morning, warns that lowering drug prices might mean fewer new drugs get made in the future. That's because drug companies need to make enough money to take the risk of inventing new medicines, which often fail and cost a lot. There is some upside to this. The potential bright side is this could be good for biotechs, because the biotechs they're scrappy. They want to come in and try to create a drug that's maybe cheaper, and so they can use their size to their advantage. They're not a Eli Lilly, they're not a Pfizer, so they can come in and try to make drugs cheaper, but some of them are difficult to make cheap, like the biologics, the monoclonal antibodies, and those are the ones that may actually still be expensive in other countries too.
So I don't think there's a negative to any of these initiatives that Trump's implementing and his cabinet. In other words, the last video you and I did on this was about the one study, right? And
Yeah,
then,
the rare disease.
but if that were to move forward with normal, not rare disease, but I guess I don't know how to phrase it, not normal drugs, but drugs that affect much more of the population, if they were to develop a similar program where it's one study and then real world evidence would be the second study.
Right, for rare disease, that's what
But
Mark
I'm saying if that's successful, that will be pushed to move forward to, I would think, all drug trials. And
Correct.
I've kind of thought we should do this for a very long time, right?
Yeah.
For everything, but this would reduce costs for everyone. But the negative to that, of course, is for our industry in terms of sites and the like, because
and this is when the pharma lobbyists are going to get busy. So
well, I think the pharma lobbyists would actually be, I think, inclined to want this to move forward, right? Not necessarily the one side of it that Trump's positioning right now, but more the other side of it, in which I don't know whose plan this is. It was, you know his name,
Markey,
the funny guy at the FDA. But anyhow, I think it was him.
Markey, yeah, Marty Markey.
Yeah. So if that were to be implemented, I think pharma would be all for it.
I think the small biotechs,
drastically reduce costs on their end.
I think the small biotechs would be for it. The big pharma that already have a bunch of drugs approved, and if you're telling them, hey, you got to lower your U.S. prices by 80%.
No, that part of it they wouldn't be for. But what I'm saying is the one trial and to market, I think all pharma would be for that, unless the costs are prohibitive enough for the big pharma to keep the little pharma out. I don't know.
Right, but that is the other shoe to drop. So the most favored nation pricing, it's one shoe. This congressional vote likely in mid-2026 due to midterm election pressure. How pharma reacts based on their investment in R&D is what you're talking about.
Right, and if both are implemented.
Yes, if both are implemented, which in many ways, so more trials might shift to rare diseases because they can still command higher prices. And then at the same time,
more trial centers, you mean, not trials, right? Trial centers.
Right. No, more trials for rare diseases or biologics, because those ones can still command higher prices.
Right.
Right. And at the same time, you're saying, well, we can use real world evidence now for at least for the rare diseases. They didn't never said for the biologics, but at least for the rare diseases. Mm-hmm. Matter of fact, the head of CBER, which is in charge of biologics, Prasad, I'm trying to get him on the show. I'm in the middle of reading his book. he's saying we need very stringent approvals. So in many ways, this is like the perfect storm against the clinical research ecosystem that we're working on, and it's the perfect storm for like small biotechs to come up and figure out, okay, well, this is the pricing model we have to have. This is the framework we're allowed to do studies on, and this is what we can kind of get away with. And we already know biologics and Me Too cancer therapies are going to really have to show excellent results, not just surrogate endpoints, but like increased survival rates, not just shrinkage of tumors. We need all three of those things to go. This is going to give the biotechs a blueprint for what they need to do. This is going to let Lilly, Pfizer, and them look at who they're going to be acquiring or what kind of research they're going to be doing. And if Europe and Latin America raises their drug prices and the US lowers it a bit, you might do more trials overseas because it's cheaper to do the trials overseas too. This is the most expensive country to do trials in. No drug company wants to do trials in the US because we're cheap and affordable. That's not why they do it. They do it here because they can sell the drugs here at the highest price. If you take that away, why do trials here in the most expensive place to do trials? You know, and if Germany responds to this as well, we're going to raise our prices because our drug companies in Europe here, they do want to get paid a little more, and it's going to help their US market as well. So instead of selling it for, like you said, $88 a treatment, we're going to sell it for $800. And then the US, we're selling it for $1,600. Now we're going to drop to $800. Well, it's more parity. Trump gets what he wants, but then the research sites, the ecosystem here in the US is going to basically be diluted, because what's the difference between a site in Yuma versus a site in Germany, where it's essentially costs less to do it there because the coordinators are paid less than they're paid here. And
you would have an outflow of jobs.
Right. Now, the pharma lobbyists are going to be busy. They're already working. They're already with the money gun, like you at SOS on stage.
There you go.
That is what they're doing right now in DC.
Sure.
Let that money gun go, because look at all the money that was being invested on GLP drugs in the US. And still, I mean, you negotiate these budgets all the time. You think they're okay with all of a sudden now, whatever we thought we were going to sell this for when it gets approved, we have to take a 50% haircut? They're not going to be okay with that. In what world is that okay? So they're going to push hard against this. The biotechs are just going to kind of stand on the sidelines because they're the ones that either get acquired or they're looking at how they're going to fund their next R&D studies for the portfolios they have. So I think it's business as usual for a year. I don't think studies get pulled. I think Pharma actually believes they can turn this into a nothing burger.
They can navigate this.
I think Pharma has more to lose than biotechs. I think the most to lose are the research sites and the CROs in the US.
Oh, yeah, I agree.
And the CRAs in the US, who have already been severely impacted. Without this.
Sure, I don't think this really affects Pharma.
I think it affects big Pharma. I don't think it affects the small biotechs.
See, I would disagree, because obviously they will not invest in new projects, R&D, if the money's not there. They'll just live off of what they have. Now that would be detrimental to their long tail, as you put it.
It would be detrimental to society as well.
Well, there would be less new drugs that would potentially be beneficial for treatments. But who's to say if this were transitioned over to other countries that they just wouldn't increase, like you're saying, the pharma would just invest in those countries for R&D, and the United States, if they want these new treatments, would be forced to accept them. They wouldn't work with the FDA, in which they have to pay these astronomical fees in order to be able to sell drugs here.
That's one alternative. So Trump already went through some of the alternatives. If you pharma don't lower your US prices to the most favored nation, we have weapons as well, right? He talked about tariffs already. but they're talking about allowing generic or cheap drugs from overseas to come into the U.S. They'll incentivize that to happen. That's one option. The other option, which would put downward pricing pressure on the U.S. drugs anyways. The other option is the Europeans get involved and say, well, we're just going to raise our prices so that you won't, like, our U.S. market doesn't take that big of a hit, right? There'll still be a hit, but it will be closer to what, like, the parity that they want. Well, that impacts research sites because now a patient in Yuma, Arizona is worth the same as a patient in Bucharest, Romania.
And it's funny if that should happen, because I mean, I don't know if this is true, but I've always thought that in essence, by us paying these high drug prices, we're essentially funding socialized medicine in these European countries because they don't have to pay these prices for drugs. Right. So it would be funny to see that happen. There's socialized
and we're making
medicine.
It harder to have socialized medicine.
Socialized medicine would go by the wayside in Europe, and it would actually be much more possible here in the United States if this were to occur.
Correct.
So that would be kind of a funny transition. I don't want socialized medicine.
Another funny transition, it would be the very research that they're trying to bypass requirements. So instead of 2 double-blind studies, to only do 1 with real-world evidence on the rare disease, as an example, that Mark Hay actually said. That would make the rare disease drugs safe because you don't have a market, so there is no more like most favored nation pricing if it's the only drug out there.
Yep.
So that would incentivize a whole ecosystem of like innovation around rare disease, right? But and those sites, well, you would only have one study instead of 2, but those sites would actually be somewhat sheltered, as opposed to the multi-therapeutic sites, which just a week ago we said are fine. It's the rare disease sites that are not fine. Fast forward a week later, with this new executive order, there is a universe where rare disease sites are actually fine again. So this is like changes every week based on new executive orders, new tweets. All I know is the pharma lobbyists are going to go to work. I don't know where I stand on this. Obviously, I'm biased as somebody who earns his money from this ecosystem in the United States. You know, most favored nation sounds like it's a fair thing, and obviously we need to have more parity, but this could directly impact how we all watching, most of you watching.
So this
earn your money.
This is the altruistic test, right?
Well, yeah, and what true altruism, I'm not sure if it actually exists. Like, altruism starts at home. Isn't that the quote used?
Sure.
Like, it's easy to say for someone else to be altruistic, but the true test of it is, can you do it yourself?
That's what I'm saying. This is the test.
Yeah, this is the test. Yeah, I never claimed to be one to be very altruistic. Sure. This is a great conversation.
But my point is, lots of people claim to be altruistic, and
sure, the virtue signaling and all this is out of control.
Yeah, they're full of it.
Well,
in my opinion, most of them
haven't thought it all the way through, maybe. But remains to be seen. I'm still on the side of nothing burger. I think pharma lobbies so hard. I don't think this actually passes.
So I think this more falls in the wheelhouse of what Trump typically does, right? The big ask because he's got something else going on. Or it could be not a benchmark, but like a bench test to see, is there a climate for this, right? Because like whoever this person you're referring to that wrote that article, he's saying there's really nothing here. It's a nothing burger. Right?
John Carroll, he said so far it's a nothing burger.
Right, and it could be intentional as nothing burger, just to see if there's a climate for this.
John Carroll sees it as sound and fury with no immediate action, and he's skeptical about Congress acting in the view of the executive order as a threat to drug companies. But basically, bottom line, because you and I got to get on another call, fewer trials possibly due to reduced R&D budgets. Uncertainties causing delays or cancellations, cheaper imported drugs reducing demand for new drugs, trials potentially shifting overseas, and long-term risk of less innovation. Obviously, this needs to pass. needs Congress to act for full impact, and it's not enforceable. The only levers they have are Medicare pricing control, really. Likely in mid-2026, so by this time next year, due to midterm election pressure, the industry will lobby hard and may delay implementation through legal challenges. Diversify. If you're a site owner, start looking. I mean, you should have been doing this anyways, but look to diversify. Go maybe look in high value areas like oncology, rare disease. It's something that we've been considering anyways. Um, more trials maybe for rare disease and biologics, although with Prasad at the head of the CBER, I don't know, that's risky too. In many ways, this administration is argues with itself. And you said maybe that's a good thing. They're willing to put people on that have differing views, right? Like RFK is a fan of CRISPR, and then Marquet and Prasad not necessarily. They say, well, it's way too expensive for what it costs. Those are conflicting views. In many ways, this executive order, some of the ways, conflicts with Marquet and Prasad's viewpoint. In other ways, they match up to be perfect storms. It just depends what way you want to look at it. And at the end of the day, Congress, I think this gets tied up in court. I mean, pharma is by far the most hated industry in the world for a reason. They have plenty of influence and maybe endless supplies of money to be able to fight.
You read all the founding fathers' biographies, or not biographies.
Not all of them. I read Alexander Hamilton, Ben Franklin.
Okay, you have read a significant number, more than I.
Okay.
I think you read something on Thomas Jefferson as well, I believe.
No, I just read the what is it called? Federalist Papers.
Yeah, everybody should read those. But I thought you read something specific on Jefferson. But anyhow, I mean, I believe you'll agree with this. Founding fathers thought they developed not necessarily the perfect system, because there are ways to change it, but they thought they had a good idea in place and made it difficult to change things, right? So things couldn't be done drastically. And I think all administrations should work in that way, right?
Yeah.
It should be a sound idea. Everybody should not agree on the same thing, right?
And endless money, how dare you? I believe this is Robert Goldman. And it's an inside joke. And then Helen, we did discuss the PBMs. I think that's the real target of this without him coming out saying it. Because the PBMs are, in a way, forcing the drug companies to have these higher prices. It's a way that they make their money and the PBMs can make their money too. And if one has to go, push comes to shove, which we have to go, I think it's going to be the PBMs. But we got to go, man. Chris, I'm going to send you the link for the Zoom call. We got to jump on.
All right.
We'll have Darshan on, and he's going to tell us how this is the end of our industry as we know it. And everybody,
the absolute end.
Yes, that's it. I'm not in that camp, but I really got to go. Thank you, guys. Don't lose the faith. Keep the faith. We should go out with America the Beautiful. Bye-bye.